Hello, EDU 304, and welcome to round 2 of the Enneagram. Today we are going to be discussing Enneagram number 9, the Peacemaker. And before we get into that, one note that I wanted to make, I mentioned this briefly in our last lecture, but I just wanted to clarify this. As we work our way through all of these numbers, there is not a particular number that is the goal. You are naturally going to find yourself resonating and associating and connecting with certain numbers. And it may be more than one. And that's all right, because we will talk later on about how you might wing one way or the other and the certain numbers that you move to in times of stress and in times of security. But a number 1 is not better than a number 2 is better than a number 3, or it's not that number 9, because it's the highest, is the best, or anything like that. But as I mentioned in our previous lecture, really a good solid team is going to be a combination of all of these numbers, because different people bring different characteristics, different traits, different strengths, and different weaknesses to everything that we do. So let's go ahead and move on from number 8, and let's talk about a very different type of personality, which is that of the Peacemaker, typified on the Enneagram as number 9. And I begin again with this kind of spectrum, from moving from what a healthy 9 might look like to what somebody who is not mentally, emotionally healthy might look like. And so a healthy 9 is a natural mediator. They're able to have conversations with virtually everybody. They see and they value perspectives of others. That's very different than what we noted in the number 8. Oftentimes very unselfish, they're flexible, and they're inclusive. All right, that is a 9 in great and perfect health. Not always the case. Average 9s may come off as easygoing, however, they are often stubborn and out of touch with their anger. They overlook themselves, they feel unimportant, and they will stand up for others, but rarely stand up for themselves. And a 9 who is living in a state of unhealth often has trouble making decisions, becomes overly dependent, engages in numbing behaviors to dull feelings of sadness or anger. So naturally, you're already assessing yourself a little bit and thinking, is this me? Is this me sometimes, all the time? Or does this sound like somebody who is in my relational world, who I know and I interact with daily? The deadly sin of the 9s is often one of sloth. But where we think of sloth as just laziness, let's clarify that a little bit. What we mean by sloth is that 9s, they are the least likely of any number on the Enneagram to really develop that fire in the belly. That desire from within to chase after their God-given life. And because of that, they sometimes fail to fully develop or become their own person. They're the least controlling number on the Enneagram, which sounds great, but oftentimes has disastrous consequences for a 9 personally. And then I note at the bottom that if 8s are too in touch with their gut instincts and overexpress their anger, 9s are the number that is most often out of touch with their gut and underexpress their anger. The dominant emotion for 9s is often the emotional desire of comfort. Think about that. Comfort is not a bad thing. But when comfort rules your life, it can have consequences. 9s need to avoid conflict at all cost. They see nothing beneficial about it, nothing there's nothing to enjoy in conflict, and so their gut reaction, if they have one, is just to simply avoid it. Now you can see, coming on the heels of our discussion of the number 8, how having a number 8 and a number 9 in relationship could often be bad for the number 9, whose voice and opinion is in the first place not often given, but even when it is often steamrolled by a number 8, because the number 9 doesn't want the conflict that the number 8 often brings to the table. Because nines so value feeling comfortable and preserving connection with others, they can often set aside their own viewpoints, their own aspirations to merge with those of others. I want you to think about people in your relational world, maybe including yourself, who, when asked a simple question like, "Where do you want to go and eat today?" Don't respond. And they leave that decision making up to others because they want to set aside their own viewpoints so that they're able to meet the needs of other people. Again, this is not a bad thing. This selflessness can be seen as heroic in some sense, but when it comes to the point where the number nine does not feel like they're developing their own feelings, they're voicing their own feelings, they're developing their own opinions, or even becoming their own person, that's when this can become a problem. And often because their desire is to seek comfort in all stressful circumstances, they can often turn to food, sexuality, drinking, exercise, shopping, and other reassuring and comfortable coping mechanisms in an attempt to numb out and ignore their true feelings, their wants, or their desires. Because they verbally meander at times and draw out stories, this has led others to refer to their talk style as the quote-unquote epic saga. One of the strengths of nines are that they're often able to view the world from the viewpoint of every number but their own. So they're able to connect with the motivations and the desires of a number 8. And they're also able to go on the other side of the spectrum and connect to the desires of number 2s, or even down to the more introverted type of spectrum and connect with the 4s or the 5s. Okay, but they're often not able to articulate or form their own opinions, or they could be swayed by whoever they spoke to most recently, right? And so they talk to one friend and they're convinced they're going to vote Democrat, and then they talk to another friend a little bit later and then they're convinced they're going to vote Republican, or whatever the case might be. When it comes to work and it comes to relationships, nines often become very passionate at the beginning phases of a project, but they'll frequently abandon half-completed or unfinished projects later on. Because they can connect with so many other numbers, they're seen as a jack of all trades, but not really a master of any one particular feeling or perspective or emotion. They often sit on the fence, weighing all options, but not making a decision. Do you have a friend? Do you have a relative? Do you have somebody in your relational network who, when you finally get to that restaurant, cannot decide on what they're going to order? That would be a number 9, or at least a trait of a number 9. The middle child syndrome, or the classic lost child, typifies number 9. Again, this is a stereotype, so not every 9 is going to be a middle child and connect with this in 100%. But it does help us get some sort of view, some sort of understanding of what happens in childhood that often shapes this personality trait or characteristic. Many 9s grew up in homes where they were or perceived themselves to be overlooked. As a middle child, oftentimes their preferences, opinions, or feelings were not often considered, and they just had to go with the flow. Again, not necessarily bad, but when they're never given the opportunity to exercise their God-given personality and express their perspectives and their opinions, this can be a negative. 9s desire a special place in the home where they can retreat to be quiet and engage in activity that enhances their experience of peacefulness. This recharges the 9's batteries. This is important for us to consider whether we're a number 9 or if we're in relationship or connection to the other people who might be this number. One of their defense mechanisms is denial. They might ignore the obvious signs that something is wrong. They might minimize problems or suggest simple band-aid solutions for issues that really require surgery. And stubbornness is the 9's go-to passive-aggressive behavior. When we talk about difficulty prioritizing tasks or getting sidetracked, I wanted to share one more story from the text with you. One night, Anne, and this is the author talking of his wife, Anne and I invited my mom to join us for dinner at 6 p.m. At 3 p.m., Anne announced she was going to make a quick run to the grocery store to buy ingredients for the meal. At 5 o'clock, she still hadn't returned, so I called her cell. "Where are you? My mom's coming in 60 minutes. Have you been to the grocery store yet?" Silence. "Not yet. I was on my way there, but Sue was out on her front lawn, so when I drove past her house, I stopped to say hello. And while we were talking, the chain of one of her kids' bikes fell off, and she didn't know how to put it back on, so I helped her. After that, I realized I had grease on my blouse, so I stopped by CVS to buy some stain remover. And I remembered I had a prescription in my purse for Maddie's eye drops, so I got that filled. And then when I was finally on my way to Whole Foods, I drove past Bed Bath & Beyond and saw a banner up advertising a bedding sale. And Aiden, well, he'll need new sheets and pillows for school in September, and I had a bunch of 20% off coupons in my purse, so I ran inside and bought some. But now I'm almost to the grocery store, and I'll be home in 20 minutes. Now, this might seem a little bit hyperbolic, right? But oftentimes there are people whose personality sways them for whatever is happening at the moment. They want to meet the needs of all people that they encounter, and they want to make the most of the time that they have, that there's difficulty in prioritizing tasks. In this story, the wife was tasked with going to the grocery store, getting the food so that she could prepare a meal for the mother. And now the husband, depending upon whatever number he is, he might begin to become agitated and stressed because he's beginning to think, well, this meal is not going to be prepared in time, and things are not going to flow the way that I anticipated they would. And so we begin to see the importance of recognizing some of the tendencies of each number on the Enneagram. As I noted in our last lecture, every number tends to move towards a different number in times of stress and in times of security. It doesn't mean that those numbers that they gravitate towards are in and of themselves either good or bad, but in times of stress, oftentimes our number will move to the unhealthy side of whatever number it swings towards. And so in times of stress, oftentimes number 9 will display traits of unhealthy 6s, which are the loyalists. They become overcommitted, they become overworried, rigid, or wary of others, and oftentimes anxious. Decisions become even more difficult as they become more self-doubting. They can engage in what's called paralysis of analysis. Okay, where because they're so preoccupied with all of these things, they cannot make a decision. However, in times of security, 9s can move towards that of a healthy 3, which is a performer. They become more goal-oriented, more decisive, more self-confident, and more in touch with their life's agenda. As always, I try to give you a series of careers that are most common for 9s. And you see here that teacher is certainly one of those. Really, a teacher can hit almost every number. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult for 8s, though I do think there are plenty of 8s that are working in K-12 education, and especially in leadership positions within K-12 education. But here we see a list of careers for 9s. And as promised, I tried to keep this between 10 and 15 minutes. I will try to be even more succinct in our next lesson. Thanks for viewing.